Hello fellow survivors, did you know that you can now place campfires at a steeper incline than you could before? Well, that's because there's been a patch that changes quite a few things in the game. Hotfix 3 as we call it, or patch 2.4, and this patch was actually released a little while ago, so it's actually not news as such anymore. But nevertheless, I thought I'd go over this patch with you, or at least some of the highlights from it, because in this patch there are a few changes that are quite important to the game, and some other ones that are kind of strange, and I thought we'd go over it even though it's not new per se. And let's just hop in and you'll see what I mean. First off is one change that is very interesting that has an impact on the game when you do hunting and cooking, and that's to do with campfire placement. So many of us has probably been in this situation where we hunt a deer or something, it starts bleeding out, and then it dies on a slope somewhere in the map. And you're like, oh, that's so annoying. Now it's on a slope, I can't put a fire next to it, and I can't harvest it without getting cold. And it's really annoying. So you're going to have to either embrace the cold, put a campfire somewhere nearby and move back and forth, or use torches to stack for warmth or something like that. So that's always been an issue. You know, it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does happen, it's quite annoying. Well, they've improved that. It says in the patch note they adjusted the placement logic of slope surfaces to be more lenient with campfire placement and rock caches as well. And I tested this. Here you can see how it was before the patch. This is a slope in Pleasant Valley, and as you can see, as the slope progresses, it very quickly tells you can't place a campfire there anymore. It's just too steep. And that's how it used to be. It didn't take much of a slope before the game said, nope, can't put a campfire there. Well, here's what it looks like afterwards. In the new patch, they are a bit more lenient. You can continue placing campfires up the slope to a fairly large degree. It doesn't go on forever, of course. You can't have a really crazy angle to the campfire. It still will eventually tell you that you can't place any campfires anymore, but it's a lot more lenient than before. This will mean that in general circumstances, you should now be able to start a fire next to a deer or something that died on a sloped surface. Of course, it won't always be the case, it depends on the surface, but there will be a lot more instances now where this is possible. I have two campfires, especially here. You can see one on the left is how was the steepest it could be before. The one on the right is as steep as it can be now. So there is a difference there, and this should improve, well, quality of life when we go hunting and the deer runs away, basically. Then there's one thing that they changed in the game that I gotta be honest, for the life of me, and I cannot see it. I don't know what the change is. I'm gonna show it to you, and then you can tell me if I'm wrong. So in the patch notes, it says that they have changed the arrow UI. So they said that there's a change in the HUD that indicates what type of arrow is being selected when you equip the bow. So in the past, if you equip the bow, say in the bottom right what the arrow type is, you can switch, and it also changes the icon a little bit. I've made a mistake in the past of having the wrong arrow equipped, and that almost cost me a run because whoops, I couldn't kill the wolf. So I read this and I thought, that's great. That's it's not a big deal, but it's nice. But when I tested it in the new patch, I, for the life of me, could not figure out what the difference was. They look identical to me. I can't tell any difference whatsoever, even when I do side-by-side comparisons. So if you noticed what this was, please let me know, because I cannot see what this change is. Yeah, moving on. Then there are two cooking changes that are very small, but I think worth pointing out, because they're very small quality of life improvements. One is that now in the recipe book, it actually says the amount of items produced when you cook it. This wasn't the case before, and it wasn't very intuitive either. So when we cooked, for example, rosehip pies, you actually got 3 pies, not 1, but you didn't really know that until you made the actual pies. Now, how it says how many you get, so it's a bit more intuitive. The other one is something that's very small. They improved the cooking UI, allowing for keyboard input when you change what you want to place on a fire. Before and after, visually you can't tell the difference, but before you couldn't actually use the keyboard to choose this, but now you can. So if you have a bunch of different meat that you want to put on the surface and you need to scroll through it, it's now a lot easier to do it. Very, very small thing, but nevertheless something cool that they added. There's another minor change that is a bit odd, which is to do with the visual designs. There is one that says that they updated the underside of train cars to remove unsightly details. Now you may have noticed that just recently, in a relatively recent patch, they changed the train cars around the world so that they got different aesthetics. They look different now. And then they added this saying that they changed the underside to remove, quote, unsightly details. And here you can see the difference. Here's what it looked like before. And yeah, it's just some splots and whatnot. And here's what it looks like now. And yeah, there is a difference. It's a little bit cleaner, I guess, in a new version. I'm going to be honest though, I think I never thought about this in my life. I'm not sure if anyone ever thought about it. What I think is kind of strange is that when they changed the train cars to the new design, they didn't actually mention that in the patch, but then they did mention this part in the patch, which is kind of an odd choice. Hintland is quite known for making changes to the game without putting it in the patch notes. There have been some major changes in the game throughout, and one of them was that they changed the visual aesthetics of the cars, and they didn't mention that, but then they did mention they changed this. You know, it's a nice little change, but it's not really a big deal. Now, all that being said, those were the only things that stood out to me in this patch note. Most of the other ones are just general fixes and all sorts of things, the UI or art, and also safe house, of course. There are a couple of things I wanted to mention though before we end it, which are certain things that have not been fixed in this patch that some people are still talking about. And one of them is quite important. One of them is cooking with ruined food. So for a long time in the Long Dark, you could still cook if you had ruined food. Then suddenly that wasn't possible anymore. You couldn't use the ingredients. There was a workaround that I'm not going to get into that allows you to do it even though it's ruined, but everyone would just assume that this is a bug. However, it turns out this is not a bug. It's not fixed in this patch, and the support on Hintland Forum clarified that this is an intended design. So that you have ruined food now actually doesn't allow you to cook with it anymore. Now, what's interesting about this is that this has been a bit controversial because the thing is, this has been in the game for such a long time that you can cook with ruined items. So it was kind of unexpected that this change would happen. That being said, it's a welcome change in the sense because it's kind of stupid that you can eat ruined food and even cook with it. I know that cooking level 5 gives you immunity to food poisoning, that sort of thing, unless you play on misery, that is. So it's a strange thing to be in the game to begin with, of course. But what people don't like is that this came out of left field. It wasn't really announced or anything. So a lot of people have excess ruined ingredients that they can't now use. They're sitting on ruined potatoes, for example, that are now useless in cooking. So this was completely unexpected. So it's an interesting change in the sense that it makes sense that you shouldn't be able to cook with ruined ingredients, but it was never announced that this change was coming, so people are caught a bit off guard about it. Let me know what you think about that. There's a couple of other things that have not been fixed that people have frequently encountered. I'm sure they will be fixed in time. I always thought I'd briefly mention it. In Coastal Highway, the cougar still has not returned. You might remember the cougar was in Coastal Highway, but it wasn't working properly to do with the expansion of the cougar. It respawned too fast and some other things. And as of now, it's not added back to the Coastal Highway yet, but it should come back at some point. The fishing lures in the game are also not fixed yet. They work differently than intended, at least based on people who use them. The way they work is that they increase your chance of getting rare fish, but your actual catch chance is reduced, which doesn't really make any sense, and it's almost certainly a bug. I can't imagine that being a feature. So that's not fixed either. Then there's an interesting one, just thought I'd point this one out, but there are some items in the game that currently sink, and you might not even notice it, but some of you may have noticed that, for example, the safes in your runs are missing. I mean, the safe in my 500-day run is gone, and I always wonder what happened to it. Turns out they sink. A good example is the safe in Full on Muskeg. If you go to Full on Muskeg and go to Spencer's farm, there is that safe there that you can open. And you got to put in the code and open it and all that stuff. No problem there. However, if you go to Full on Muskeg and then enter an indoor location first, so if you go to the bunker that's nearby, for example, if you do that, you trigger a sink. So if you now go back to Spencer's farm, you'll notice that the safe isn't there anymore. And if you hadn't already opened it, then good luck, because it's not there. Well, where is the safe, you might ask? Well, it's nowhere you can find unless you have a mod. If you do have a mod that allows you to clip through terrain, you can then fly below the ground, and voila, the safe, it has sunk and it's below the ground. That's where it is. So that hasn't been fixed either. So yeah, there's quite a few things to iron out. Now that's okay, all of this will probably be fixed in time. Hintlen, in the last patch, the Broken Silence, added a huge amount to the game. There were so many things added, and they openly said that there will be a lot of bugs because so many new things. And in time, the game will be more and more flawless. And to be honest, the majority of the bugs that are still in the game are not that devastating, and most of them we can get by. Okay, so let me know what you think about this patch, and also let me know if you can figure out what this arrow thing is, because I can't figure out the UI change that they're talking about. And also one thing they also haven't fixed is the festive sweater. So a festive sweater was added to the game around Christmas, and it had an interaction with the Aurora, and I've asked around and tried it myself, and as far as I know, no one has been able to figure out what this was. But I've heard that this was bugged, and it's a feature that hasn't been fixed yet. So that's not fixed either, unless I missed it somehow. So that's it for this patch. Hope you enjoy the game as much as I do, and have a great one. I'll see you next time, survivors. Bye bye.